Earning your degree online doesn't mean you have to go about it alone. At Capella University, we're here to support you when you're ready. From enrollment counselors who get to know you and your goals, to academic coaches who can help you form a plan to stay on track. We care about your success and are dedicated to helping you pursue your goals. Going back to school is a big step, but having support at every step of your academic journey can make a big difference. Imagine your future differently at capella.edu.
Ryan Reynolds here for, I guess, my 100th Mint commercial. No, don't. I mean, honestly, when I started this, I thought I only have to do like 4 of these. I mean, it's unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month. How are there still people paying 2 or 3 times that much? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be victim blaming here. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/save. Whenever you're ready.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
Thanks for listening to the Red Treehouse, where I tell scary stories to keep you up at night. You can listen to the Red Treehouse on your favorite streaming platforms, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Be sure to follow, like, and subscribe. Oh, and leave a 5-star review. You can follow the Red Treehouse on social media, on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, X, Threads, and Facebook at Red Treehouse Pod. And now you can find the Red Treehouse on Patreon. Join the Red Treehouse community for as little as $3 per month and receive exclusive member benefits, including personal shoutouts, early access to episodes, bonus episodes, and more. Simply go to patreon.com/Red Treehouse. As always, if you have a scary story or topic you'd like me to feature on an upcoming episode, email redtreehousepod@gmail.com. Important note, sources for this episode can be found in the show notes. The Red Treehouse is dedicated to my dad. I love you, Pop. By now, it's no secret that I love scary movies. In fact, I've loved them since I was a kid living in Brooklyn, New York. In those days, network television often played horror movies later in the evening, when most kids would be getting ready for bed. I'll never forget the thrill and terror of sneak watching The Exorcist on ABC Channel 11 back in the day. I'll never forget the thrill and terror of sneak watching The Exorcist on ABC Channel 11 back in the day. I must have used the bathroom 50 times in those 3 hours. Each time, catching a minute here and there of what I still consider to be the scariest movie ever made. It wasn't until a few years later that I discovered one of my favorite horror movies of all time. It likely won't make the list of the best or most influential horror movies, but the 90 minutes of runtime is equally thrilling and disturbing. The premise is simple. 2 doctoral students are doing research on a local urban legend. One night, they play a Bloody Mary type game, where they dim the lights, look in the mirror, and say his name 5 times. Unfortunately for them, the urban legend isn't a legend at all. And soon enough, Candyman brings unimaginable horrors to real life. And here's the thing. The urban legend isn't just the stuff of folklore and myth. There is a real-life nightmare connected to it. In this episode of The Red Treehouse, we're going to explore the unsettling story of Candyman. Is he nothing more than a figment of our collective imagination? Or is Candyman a case of scary fiction imitating real-life horror? I'll share the details. You decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Welcome to the Red Treehouse. The story of Candyman is surprisingly straightforward, though the source material and film adaptations have significant variations. In 1985, Clive Barker published a short story, The Forbidden, in which he combined several fears to create the terrifying Candyman. The Clive Barker Archive describes the story as, quote, marrying common elements and fears, the hook-handed man, castration, the uncatchable killer, and urban brutality, end quote. A metaphor for storytelling, The Forbidden offers the reader, quote, a story about story itself, end quote. The most notable variation is the physical appearance of Candyman. In The Forbidden, he is described as, quote, multicolored, standing for every kind of other, making his universal story adaptable to resonate widely with all who are outsiders or marginalized, end quote. An excerpt from the story offers further description. Quote, he was bright to the point of gaudiness, his flesh a waxy yellow, his thin lips pale blue, his wild eyes glittering as if their irises were set with rubies. His jacket was a patchwork, his trousers the same. He looked, she thought, almost ridiculous, with his blood-stained motley and the hint of rouge on his jaundiced cheeks, and she was almost enchanted by his voice, by his colors, by the buzz from his body, end quote. Something interesting. The Forbidden doesn't offer details on Candyman's backstory. We are left to wonder about his race, upbringing, home of origin, and even how he became Candyman in the first place. The 1992 movie adaptation takes certain elements of Barker's short story and weaves a masterful tale. In the film, the viewer is introduced to Daniel Robitaille, an African-American man and the free son of a slave. His father was a wealthy business owner who sent Daniel to the best private school and who grew up with financial privilege. He was a talented artist who made a name and a living for himself, painting portraits for the wealthy. Eventually, he was commissioned to paint a portrait of a wealthy landowner's daughter. The two fell in love and into scandal as she became pregnant. The landowner sought to exact revenge, and eventually, a mob kidnapped Robitaille, cut off his hand with a rusty saw, jammed a hook into the stump, covered him in honey, set a beehive on him, and finally set him on fire. Despite his cries of agony, no one came to his aid. If that weren't nightmarish enough, the legend goes that if you stand in front of a mirror and say Candyman 5 times, he will appear behind you. Then, use his hooked hand to kill you. In some ways, Candyman is a tragic figure. His backstory is intended to evoke lament and sorrow, He committed no crime, yet was punished severely and unjustly. His appearance results in the death of the one doing the summoning. However, even this is a cruel act of torture. An innocent man forced to inflict pain and death on innocent people. His motto, "Say my name," has less to do with torture and murder, and more to do with speaking truth about systemic injustice, racism, and brutality endured by generations of black people. The motto stands as a sort of memorial statement. Saying his name prevents people from forgetting his own tragic murder. When it comes to Candyman, the true terror is not in his summoning, but in the reason behind his existence in the first place. That real-life horrors are often scarier than fictional stories. I'm sure we've all seen and heard the phrase, "based on a true story," and often take it with a grain of salt. But in the case of Candyman, fiction may just imitate real life. On April 22, 1987, Chicago police received a 911 call from Ruthie Mae McCoy. She was terrified and frantic. She claimed someone was trying to climb through the bathroom mirror into her apartment. Something interesting. Her apartment building had a peculiar design feature. Open, narrow passages in between apartments, intended to give maintenance workers easy access to each unit. The passages were intended to serve a functional purpose, but as with anything, they were used by criminals for far more sinister purposes. They would break into apartments by pushing in the cabinet in the bathroom. A Chicago Reader article provided a portion of Ruthie Mae McCoy's call to 911. Ruthie: I'm a resident at 1440 West 13th Street, and some people next door are totally tearing this down, you know? 911 dispatch: What are they doing, ma'am? They want to break in? Ruthie: Yeah, they throwed the cabinet down. 911: From where? Ruthie: I'm in the projects. I'm on the other side. You can reach my bathroom. They want to come through the bathroom. 911: All right, ma'am. At what address? Ruthie: 1440 West 13th Street, apartment 1109. The elevator's working. 911: 1109? All right. What's your name, ma'am? Ruthie: Ruth McCoy. 911: All right. I'll send you the police. Police were dispatched to Ruthie McCoy's home to, quote, answer a disturbance with a neighbor complaint, end quote. While en route, police dispatch received another phone call, quote, from a woman who said she had been walking through the hallway and heard gunshots from the apartment. At 9:04, another neighbor called to report gunshots and hollering. From 11:09, 2 more police cars headed to the scene, end quote. Sometime around 9:10 p.m., 4 police officers arrived at Ruthie McCoy's home and knocked on the door. They got no answer. Concerned about a potential hostage situation, police called dispatch and requested they call Ruthie's phone. They heard the phone ring with no answer. As time passed, officers went to the apartment office and were given the key to Ruthie's apartment. The key didn't fit the lock. At this point, police officers were unsure about what to do next and set out to interview some of the neighbors, who ultimately were of little to no help. They tried going back to the apartment office, but there were no other keys to Ruthie's apartment. At 9:48 p.m., police officers left Ruthie McCoy's apartment building without making contact or entry. The next day, one of Ruthie's neighbors called Chicago police and let them know Ruthie had not shown up to wish her a good morning, as she always did. The neighbors saw the police presence at Ruthie's apartment the night before and grew alarmed when Ruthie did not greet her that day. Concerned, police officers and several Chicago Housing Authority security guards showed up at Ruthie McCoy's apartment. They knocked and got no answer. Officers contemplated breaking the door down, but were discouraged by the security guards, who feared a lawsuit. Like the night before, police officers left Ruthie's apartment without making contact or entry. The next day, Ruthie's neighbor reached out to the apartment office, expressing concern over not seeing her that morning. An office manager went to Ruthie's apartment, this time with a carpenter, who drilled through the lock on Ruthie's front door. What they discovered was an actual nightmare. Inside the apartment, they found Ruthie Mae McCoy, lying on her side in a pool of blood. Around her body, objects were strewn about the floor. Not long after, police arrived at the apartment where they discovered Ruthie had been shot 4 times. It was clear she'd been dead for several days, as, quote, the smell of rotting flesh rose through the apartment, end quote. Upon completing an autopsy, the medical examiner determined Ruthie had been shot in her left shoulder, left thigh, the right side of her abdomen, and the right upper arm. The shot to the abdomen, quote, pierced the liver and exited the left side of the abdomen, end quote. The shot to the right upper arm was fatal, as it, quote, entered her chest and severed the pulmonary vein, end quote. Her cause of death was listed as internal bleeding, and it was likely Ruthie didn't die quickly. It was determined, however, that even with immediate medical attention, it was not likely she would have survived the attack. Something interesting. Ruthie Mae McCoy was 52 years old at the time of her death and was known to have mental health struggles. According to one article, quote, she started to display signs of mental illness in her 20s. Her family, however, did not know the extent of her illness, but stated that she would talk to herself often and was prone to bursting into anger, end quote. In 1983, Ruthie moved into a high-rise apartment after her previous apartment flooded. She was concerned with the crime in the area and was fearful of the increasing violence in and around the public housing project. And though she requested an apartment closer to her family on the other side of Chicago, she accepted the apartment in the ABLA projects. In 1986, a year before her tragic murder, she filed a report with the Chicago Housing Authority after 2 men climbed through the bathroom medicine cabinet and burglarized her apartment. The Housing Authority did nothing. After her death, 2 young men, 18-year-old Edward Turner and 21-year-old John Honduras, were arrested and charged with home invasion, armed robbery, armed violence, residential burglary, and murder. Eyewitnesses, quote, claimed to have seen them walk around the complex hours before her death, end quote. Unfortunately, the charges were dropped in 1990 due to insufficient evidence. In an interesting case of fiction imitating real life, the Candyman film included a few of the details related to Ruthie Mae McCoy's tragic death. Candyman's first victim is named Ruthie Jean, a resident of the Cabrini Green high-rise apartments. In the film, Ruthie Jean, quote, was murdered by someone who came through her bathroom mirror, end quote. In both the movie and real-life case, Ruthie called 911 prior to the murder, only to be ignored and dismissed outright. To this day, Ruthie Mae McCoy's murder remains unsolved. I'll admit, I find the story of Candyman fascinating, in part because, unlike most villains in urban legends, he is a tragic figure condemned to spend eternity as a ghoul. But Daniel Robitaille and what he represents makes me feel a certain way. The injustice of his lynching and the subsequent curse make for a different type of haunt. More than this, the tragic murder of Ruthie Mae McCoy highlights the everyday nightmare for underprivileged people. That even when they seek help, as a crime is being perpetrated against them, ultimately, they are at the mercy of those responding. In Ruthie Mae's case, she did everything she needed to keep herself safe. But when police came to her literal doorstep, they simply chose to walk away. The larger message of Candyman is worth considering. Quote, each and every known Candyman represents a manifestation of the brutalities, horrors, and disenfranchisement of the African American community that were especially present in their corresponding eras. As with each generation of Black people, mostly shown as men, moves into different versions of the same old story of unjustified deaths, Candyman is now modernly reinvented accordingly to said era. He's seen to us as the supernatural aggregation of suppressed Black history and the perpetual violence against Black people, which his "Say My Name" is most notably his continual slogan, which is less inviting people to get themselves killed than encouraging them to tell the story of the systemic racism and brutalities Black people have endured generation after generation, with each Candyman incarnation asking their victims and community to keep the name and brutal story of Candyman alive, so as not to forget the injustices faced by Black people in America. End quote. As we close this episode of the Red Treehouse, we're left with these lingering questions. Is Candyman nothing more than a figment of our collective imagination? Or is he a case of scary fiction imitating real-life horror? I've shared the details. Now you decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Thanks for joining me in the Red Treehouse.